The Horizon 7 space station drifted in the outgassing zone of the strange comet, its massive ring structure rotating slowly to generate artificial gravity for its inhabitants. Through the largest observation deck, the comet's blue-green tail stretched across the void like a painter's brushstroke against the canvas of space. The station hummed with activity as more than 10,000 workers from dozens of planets and colonies went about their daily routines. In the central kitchen hub, Marek Sade wiped sweat from his brow as he bent over a simmering pot. The rich aroma of spices filled the air: cardamom, turmeric, and saffron imported at great expense from Earth. As head chef of Horizon 7, Marek took pride in creating meals that reminded the diverse crew of home, whatever planet or colony that might be. 2 minutes until dinner service, he called to his kitchen staff, a mix of humans and humanoids who moved with practiced efficiency. Marek tasted the stew one last time, nodding with satisfaction, his fingers, once calibrated to adjust spacecraft wiring, now expertly balanced flavors instead. Few on the station knew that the man who prepared their meals had once been an aerospace engineer. Fewer still knew that Marek had chosen this position after a spectacular failure in his previous career. The kitchen had become his sanctuary, a place where mistakes could be corrected before anyone noticed them, unlike engineering disasters that lived in corporate records forever. As he ladled the stew into serving containers, Marek glanced at the small screen mounted on the kitchen wall displaying the station's operational status. All systems normal. Outside, the comet continued its lazy drift through the solar system, a celestial visitor that Horizon 7 had been tasked with studying. The corporation that owned the station had promised substantial bonuses to all staff if they could extract and analyze the comet's rare mineral compounds. The kitchen comm system crackled to life. Chef Sade, administration requests the special dinner preparations for tonight's executive meeting be expedited. The board members are arriving earlier than expected. Marek sighed. The corporate executives rarely visited the station, preferring to manage operations remotely from their comfortable planetary offices. When they did come, they expected to be treated like royalty. "Acknowledged," he replied. "Tell them we'll have everything ready." He turned to his second-in-command, a proximan with 4 arms who could chop vegetables with unmatched speed. "Linu, take over dinner service. I need to prepare the executive meal." As Marek began assembling ingredients for the executive's dinner, the station's emergency alert suddenly blared through the speakers. The kitchen lights switched to pulsing red, and the calm, automated voice that every station worker dreaded began its announcement. "Alert! Critical system failure detected. Pressure anomaly in sectors 7 through 12. All personnel implement emergency protocols immediately." Marek froze, a knife suspended over a perfectly carved piece of synthetic protein. The last time he'd heard that alert had been during a routine drill 3 months ago. This was no drill. The kitchen staff looked to him, eyes wide with alarm. Before he could issue instructions, a violent shudder ran through the station. Pots clattered to the floor, and the lights flickered. Through the small window near the prep station, Marek saw something that made his blood run cold, debris floating away from the station into space. "Seal the kitchen," he shouted. "Emergency protocols." His staff moved quickly, securing the kitchen's pressure doors as they'd been trained to do. But training exercises never captured the real panic of an actual emergency. The station-wide communication system came to life again. But instead of the calm, automated voice, the chief of operations spoke, his voice strained. "This is not a drill. We have a major breach in the main reactor housing. Initial diagnostics indicate sabotage. The executive shuttle is departing with essential personnel. Station leadership is transferring to remaining officers." All non-essential staff remain in sealed compartments until further notice. The message ended abruptly. Marek looked at his staff, their faces reflecting the shock he felt. The executives were leaving. The words sabotage and essential personnel echoed in his mind. "They're abandoning us," Linu whispered, all four hands clutching the edge of a counter for support. Before anyone could respond, another violent tremor shook the station, stronger than the first. The lights went out completely, plunging the kitchen into darkness before the emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in dim red light. In that moment, as fear threatened to overwhelm him, Marek felt something else stirring beneath the surface, a familiar sensation from his engineering days. The analytical part of his brain began assessing the situation, calculating possibilities, forming plans. "We need information," he said firmly. "Linu, check our supply inventory and secure all perishables. Tavi, try to access the station's status reports from the kitchen terminal." As his staff carried out his orders, Marek moved to the small maintenance panel hidden behind a rack of cooking utensils. Few people knew that the kitchen systems had direct access to some of the station's infrastructure, a design choice made to ensure the cooking facilities could maintain proper ventilation and power regardless of other systems. Using skills he hadn't exercised in years, Marek bypassed the standard access protocols and tapped into the station's diagnostic feed. What he saw made his stomach sink. The main reactor wasn't just damaged. It was in the early stages of a cascading failure. Pressure was dropping throughout multiple sections of the station. Life support systems were switching to emergency backups, but those wouldn't last more than 72 hours. And perhaps most alarming of all, the executive shuttle had already undocked, carrying away not just the corporate visitors but also most of the senior technical staff. They hadn't just been abandoned. They'd been left to die. Marek's hands trembled as he closed the panel. He took a deep breath, the scent of the spilled stew still heavy in the air, and turned to face his staff. "The situation is critical," he said, keeping his voice as steady as possible. "But we're not helpless. I need to tell you something I've kept to myself since I joined this station. Before I became a chef, I was an engineer. And right now, we're going to need every bit of knowledge we can gather if we're going to survive this." The faces looking back at him showed a mixture of surprise, disbelief, and most importantly, a flicker of hope. It was enough to strengthen his resolve. "We're going to need help," Marek continued. "We need to reach other sections, find anyone with technical expertise." Just as he finished speaking, the kitchen's communication panel lit up. Someone was trying to reach them. Marek pressed the receive button, and a familiar voice filled the kitchen. "The kitchen staff, this is Aaliyah Wren from engineering. If anyone can hear this, please respond." Marek's heart skipped a beat. Aaliyah Wren, the brilliant technician who had once been his colleague, before his disgrace and career change. She wouldn't be pleased to learn who was in charge of the kitchen. "Aaliyah, this is Marek Sadeh. We hear you. What's happening out there?" A pause. Then her voice returned. Cooler now. "Marek, the chef is... You? Never mind. There's no time. Listen carefully. The main systems are failing. The execs took most of our senior engineers. I'm gathering anyone with technical knowledge. Can you secure your section and meet me at Junction B17? Marek looked at his kitchen staff. They were food service workers, not emergency responders. But they were also all he had. "We'll be there," he promised. "And Aaliyah, I'm bringing my team. They may not be engineers, but we're going to need all the help we can get." Another pause. "Fine, just hurry." As the communication ended, Marek turned to his staff, people who until 5 minutes ago had looked to him only for culinary guidance. "I know this isn't what any of you signed up for," he said, "but right now, we need to think beyond our job descriptions. We're not just kitchen staff anymore. We're survivors, and we have 10,000 lives depending on us. Who's with me?" One by one, they nodded. Humanity and its galactic cousins had always shown their true strength in the face of disaster. Today would be no different. "Be good," Merrick said, reaching for the emergency equipment locker. "Then let's get to work." The journey to Junction B-17 was harrowing. Sections of the station that had been bustling with activity hours before were now eerily silent, illuminated only by emergency lighting. In some corridors, the air felt thin, a sign that the environmental systems were already struggling. They passed frightened groups of workers huddled in sealed compartments, sharing what little information they had. Merrick stopped briefly at each group, assuring them that efforts were underway to stabilize the station, encouraging them to remain calm and conserve resources. Whether they believed him or not, the mere presence of someone taking action seemed to provide comfort. When they finally reached Junction B-17, they found Aaliyah Wren and a small group of technicians gathered around a portable diagnostic terminal. Aaliyah looked up as they approached, her expression hardening when she recognized Merrick. "So the runaway engineer became a chef," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Interesting career move." Merrick felt the old shame rising but pushed it away. "We can discuss my career choices later. What's the situation?" Aaliyah's professional instincts took over. She gestured to the diagnostic displays. "It's bad. The main reactor cooling system was sabotaged. We've managed to initiate emergency shutdown protocols, but several key systems were damaged in the process. We're losing pressure in multiple sections. Toxic gases from the comet's outgassing are seeping in through damaged filtration systems. And our food reserves are critically low since the main storage compartment was one of the first areas to decompress." "What about communications?" Merrick asked. "Can we call for help?" A technician shook his head. "Long-range comms are down. The nearest potential rescue is the mining colony on Ganymede, but without comms, they won't know we're in trouble for weeks." Merrick processed this information, the engineer in him already formulating possible solutions. "What about the emergency distress beacon?" "Located in the command center," Aaliyah replied grimly, "which is currently inaccessible due to radiation leakage from the damaged reactor shielding." Silence fell over the group as the magnitude of their situation sank in. They were truly on their own. "Okay," Merrick said finally. "We need to prioritize life support, pressure integrity, and toxin filtration first. Then we worry about food and communications." Aaliyah nodded reluctantly. "That's what I was thinking, but we're short-handed. Most of us here are junior technicians. We need more experienced people." Merrick took a deep breath. "I have experience, not recent, but I know this class of station. And my kitchen staff knows more about the station's systems than you might think. The ventilation, pressure, and temperature controls for food storage integrate with the main life support systems. We work with them every day." Aaliyah looked skeptical but nodded. "At this point, we'll take whatever help we can get." She turned to the assembled group. "We need to split into teams. One to address the pressure leaks, one to work on toxin filtration, and one to assess and secure remaining food supplies." "I'll lead the food assessment team," Merrick offered. "My staff knows exactly what we have and how to preserve it." "And I suppose you've forgotten everything you once knew about engineering?" Aaliyah challenged. Merrick met her gaze steadily. "No. I remember everything, including how to redirect power conduits and bypass damaged systems, but right now, food is going to become our most critical resource after air. 10,000 people need to eat, and with the main storage compromised, we need to know exactly what we have and how long it will last." After a moment, Aaliyah nodded. "Fine. Take 2 of my technicians with you. They can help assess the storage system's integrity while you inventory the supplies." As the teams organized themselves, A young maintenance worker approached Marek hesitantly. "Sir," she said, "there's something else you should know. Before communications went down, I picked up fragments of internal messages. It sounded like not everyone on the station is working toward the same goal." "What do you mean?" Marek asked, a sense of foreboding growing. "There are rumors of a group that might have been responsible for the sabotage. Station workers who believe the Interplanetary Covenant has abandoned them. They call themselves the Reclamation." Marek exchanged glances with Aaliyah. An internal threat would complicate their already desperate situation. "Do you know who they are or what they want?" Aaliyah asked. The worker shook her head. "Only whispers, but they seem to be targeting the food storage specifically. Control of resources means control of the station." Marek finished grimly. "We'll need to be careful. For now, let's focus on assessment and stabilization. But everyone stay alert." As the teams dispersed, Marek led his group toward the auxiliary food storage areas. The main corridors were becoming increasingly difficult to navigate, with some sections sealed off due to decompression or contamination. They were forced to use maintenance tunnels and service ducts, crawling through spaces never meant for regular traffic. In one narrow passage, as Marek helped a kitchen assistant through a particularly tight squeeze, he found himself face to face with Aaliyah, who was bringing up the rear of their group. "Why did you do it, Marek?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the distant groaning of the station's stressed structure. "Why did you leave engineering? You were brilliant." Marek continued moving, avoiding her gaze. "You know why. The Europa project. 37 people died because I missed a calculation in the environmental systems." "That wasn't entirely your fault," Aaliyah insisted. "The specifications changed 3 times in the final week. The whole team was exhausted. But I was the one who signed off on the final design." Marek replied, the old guilt washing over him. "I couldn't face engineering after that. Couldn't risk making another mistake that would cost lives. In the kitchen, the worst I can do is ruin someone's dinner." "And yet here you are," Aaliyah observed. "Right back in the position of having thousands of lives depending on your decisions." Before Marek could respond, the station shuddered again, more violently than before. The lights flickered, and an ominous creaking sound filled the narrow passage. "Move!" Marek shouted, pushing forward as fast as possible. "Everyone out now!" They scrambled through the remaining length of the duct, emerging into an intersection of service corridors just as the section of duct behind them collapsed with a screech of tearing metal. Breathing heavily, they took stock. No one was injured, but their return route was now blocked. "We'll find another way back," Marek assured the group. "Let's continue to the auxiliary storage." When they finally reached the storage areas, their hopes fell further. While the auxiliary compartments remained intact, they contained only a fraction of the supplies needed for the station's population. 3 days, Linu calculated after their inventory. Maybe 4 if we implement strict rationing immediately. Marek stared at the shelves, his mind racing. "We need to think creatively. The hydroponics section, is it still operational?" One of Aaliyah's technicians checked a portable terminal. "Partially. About 40% of the growing beds are still receiving power and water." "That helps, but it's not enough," Marek mused. "What about the protein synthesizers in the secondary kitchen?" "In those run on biofuel refined from station waste," Linu pointed out. "If we could get them running at full capacity, we could stretch our food supplies significantly," Marek finished. "And the waste processing could potentially be adapted to help with the air filtration issues." For the first time since the crisis began, a spark of genuine hope ignited within the group. They weren't just fighting for survival hour by hour anymore. They were beginning to form a sustainable plan. As they worked to secure the remaining supplies and assess the synthesizers, Marek's personal communicator buzzed. It was Aaliyah. Marek, we've stabilized the pressure in sections 3 through 5, but we've discovered something concerning. The sabotage was more extensive than we initially thought. Someone systematically damaged key junction points throughout the station. This wasn't the work of one person, it was coordinated. The maintenance workers' warning about the reclamation group echoed in Marek's mind. Have you encountered any resistance? Any sign of this reclamation group? Not directly, Aaliyah replied. But we found a storage compartment that had been converted into what looks like a meeting area. There were manifestos, plans. They've been organizing for months. From what we can piece together, they believe the corporation has been deliberately exposing workers to dangerous conditions from the comet's outgassing, testing human tolerance limits without consent. Could that be true? Marek asked, disturbed by the possibility. I don't know, Aaliyah admitted, but true or not, their solution seems to be to take control of the station by force, even if it means risking everyone's lives in the process. Marek closed his eyes, processing this new complication. We need to consolidate our efforts. Bring your team to the secondary kitchen in Section 6. We're developing a plan to address the food shortage that might also help with air filtration. And it will be easier to defend a single location if we need to. Defend? Aaliyah questioned. You think it will come to that? I hope not, Marek replied, but we need to be prepared for every possibility. Over the next 12 hours, the combined team of kitchen staff and technicians worked tirelessly. They converted the secondary kitchen into a command center of sorts, with stations dedicated to monitoring the station's failing systems, coordinating repair efforts, and managing resource distribution. Marek's culinary expertise proved unexpectedly valuable as they worked to maximize the efficiency of the protein synthesizers. The same principles he used to balance flavors and textures in his dishes applied to calibrating the delicate biochemical processes that transformed waste material into edible protein. Meanwhile, Aaliyah led efforts to repurpose kitchen ventilation systems to help filter toxins from the station's air. The sophisticated filtration used to remove cooking odors from the dining areas was adaptable to capturing some of the dangerous particles seeping in from the comet's outgassing. As they worked, more station personnel found their way to their makeshift headquarters. Medical staff led by Dr. Seraphine Cho arrived with supplies and began treating injuries sustained during the initial crisis. Maintenance workers brought tools and spare parts. Even some administrative personnel came, offering to organize communication and resource distribution among the scattered groups of survivors throughout the station. Dr. Cho pulled Marek aside as he was adjusting a particularly finicky synthesizer calibration. I need to speak with you privately, she said, her expression grave. They moved to a quiet corner of the kitchen, away from the bustle of activity. What is it, doctor? Marek asked. I've been analyzing the medical reports from the past 6 months, she explained, her voice low. There's been an unusual pattern of respiratory complaints and neurological symptoms among workers in sections closest to the comet observation ports. The official diagnosis has been common space adaptation syndrome, but the symptoms don't match. It looks more like low-level toxic exposure. Marek felt a chill run through him. You're saying the reclamation group might be right? The corporation has been using us as test subjects? I can't prove intent, Dr. Cho replied carefully. But the exposure patterns are clear, and they've been systematically underreported in official records. Someone knew these workers were being exposed to something harmful and chose to hide it. The implications were staggering. If true, it meant the corporation had knowingly endangered thousands of lives in pursuit of whatever valuable compounds they hoped to extract from the comet. Does Aaliyah know about this? Marek asked. Not yet. I came to you first because you've emerged as a leader here, and frankly, because you don't have the same institutional loyalty as some of the others. You've seen the corporation's callousness firsthand. Marek nodded slowly. Thank you for trusting me with this. We'll need to discuss it with Aaliyah and the others. But carefully. Right now, our priority has to remain survival. We can address corporate accountability if we live through this. As Dr. Cho returned to her patients, Marek found himself troubled by more than just the immediate crisis. The station's failure was starting to look less like a simple act of sabotage and more like the tragic culmination of corporate negligence and worker desperation. His reflections were interrupted by a commotion at the kitchen entrance. A group of station security personnel had arrived, led by a stern-faced woman Marek recognized as the deputy head of security. "We're implementing emergency protocols," she announced. "All gatherings of more than 5 personnel must be authorized. You need to disperse and return to your assigned quarters." Alia stepped forward. "That's not possible. We're coordinating essential survival operations from this location. The station's systems are failing. If we disperse now, thousands will die." The security leader hesitated, clearly conflicted. "We have orders." "From whom?" Marek interrupted. "The executives left on the emergency shuttle. Who's giving these orders?" "The remaining administrative council," she replied, but with less certainty. "The same council that failed to prevent this disaster in the first place." Dr. Cho joined the confrontation. "I have documentation showing they were aware of dangerous conditions for months and did nothing." The security personnel exchanged uneasy glances. Their world of clear authority and chain of command was crumbling around them. Marek approached the deputy head, speaking calmly. "We're not your enemy. We're all trying to survive. But following blind orders right now won't save anyone. We need your help. Your real help, not enforcement of protocols that weren't designed for this kind of crisis." After a tense moment, the woman nodded. "What do you need from us?" "Security sweeps of key areas," Marek replied without hesitation. "We need to know which sections are still accessible, which are compromised, and we need protection for our repair teams. There's an organized group called the Reclamation that may have been behind the sabotage." "We've encountered them," the security leader confirmed grimly. "They've taken control of several sections, including what remains of the main food storage. They're heavily armed. They raided the security armory during the initial chaos. This news cast an even darker shadow over their situation. Not only were they fighting against the station's failing systems and toxic exposure, but they now faced an armed opposition controlling critical resources. We need to establish communication with them." Marek decided, find out what they really want. See if we can negotiate. We're all trapped here together. Fighting among ourselves only ensures that none of us survive. As the security team integrated with their operation, providing invaluable information about the station's status, Marek gathered Aaliyah, Dr. Cho, and a few other key personnel for a strategy session. "We've made progress on immediate survival needs," he began. "The protein synthesizers are operating at 70% capacity. Ventilation workarounds are reducing toxic levels in our controlled sections. But we have 3 major problems remaining. The reactor is still in danger of a cascading failure. We can't access the communications array to call for help, and we have an armed group controlling critical resources. We should prioritize the reactor," Aaliyah argued. "If it goes critical, nothing else matters. But we can't fix it without accessing the main engineering section," a technician pointed out, "which means passing through areas controlled by the Reclamation Group. So we need to address the human problem first." Marek concluded, "Dr. Cho, your medical evidence about toxic exposure might give us leverage in negotiations. If their primary grievance is corporate negligence regarding safety, proof that they're right could bring them to the table. Dr. Cho nodded. I can compile the most compelling evidence, but we should be prepared for the possibility that they're beyond negotiation. If they've gone so far as to sabotage the station, we have to try, Merrick insisted. And while we're preparing for negotiations, we'll continue developing technical solutions. Aaliyah, is there any way to access the reactor controls remotely? Possibly, she said, though she didn't sound confident. There's a maintenance bypass in Section 4B that might give us limited access. Not enough to fully repair the reactor, but maybe enough to prevent a critical failure. And communications? The auxiliary array in the observatory module could be reconfigured to send a basic distress signal. Not as powerful as the main array, but it might reach Ganymede if we boost it with power from non-essential systems. Merrick nodded. Good. We'll pursue all three approaches simultaneously. Dr. Cho, prepare your evidence for negotiation. Aaliyah, assemble a team for the reactor bypass. I'll work with the communications specialists on the observatory array. As they disbanded to their respective tasks, Merrick felt the weight of responsibility settling more heavily on his shoulders. He had come to Horizon 7 to escape such burdens, to lose himself in the simple certainties of the kitchen. Now he found himself once again making decisions that could determine whether people lived or died. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. Repair teams moved through the station's arteries, stabilizing systems where possible, implementing workarounds where necessary. The protein synthesizers worked overtime, producing enough basic nutrition to keep starvation at bay for a few more days. Medical teams treated injuries and monitored toxin exposure levels. And throughout it all, Merrick found himself at the center, coordinating efforts, making decisions, providing the leadership that the station so desperately needed. When the security team finally established contact with the reclamation group, requesting a meeting to negotiate, the response was unexpected. They agreed immediately, but with one condition. They would speak only with the chef who was once an engineer. Somehow, they knew about Merrick's past and had specifically asked for him. It could be a trap, Aaliyah warned when Merrick told her of the condition. Of course it could, he agreed. But it's our best chance to resolve this without further bloodshed. At least take security with you, she insisted. Merrick shook his head. They specified I come alone to a neutral location, the Arboretum in Section 8. It's one of the few areas not critically damaged and not under either group's direct control. And you're just going to trust the people who sabotaged the station? No, Merrick replied, but I am going to talk to them. We have Dr. Cho's evidence. We have a plan to save the station. Maybe that will be enough. Aaliyah grabbed his arm as he turned to leave. Merrick, be careful. We've lost too many people already. The concern in her eyes touched him. Despite their past and her initial coldness when they'd reunited, she still cared. Perhaps some bonds couldn't be broken, even by years of separation and resentment. I'll be careful, he promised. Keep working on the reactor bypass. If negotiations fail, that becomes our priority. The journey to the Arboretum was tense. Merrick moved through increasingly unfamiliar parts of the station, areas where the damage was more severe and the air carried the acrid smell of electrical fires and leaking coolant. Twice he had to detour around collapsed sections, navigating through service ducts much as they had done earlier. The Arboretum itself was eerily beautiful, designed to provide psychological comfort to station personnel and to supplement oxygen production. It was a vast chamber filled with plants from a dozen worlds. Emergency lighting cast long shadows among the trees and shrubs, and the air was noticeably cleaner than in the rest of the station. Merrick entered cautiously, every sense alert for danger. At first, the Arboretum appeared empty. But then a figure stepped out from behind a large fern-like plant native to Proxima Centauri b. Marek Sada, the man said, his voice oddly familiar. The engineer who became a chef. How fitting that you've now been forced back into your original role. As the man moved into the light, Marek felt a shock of recognition that nearly stopped his heart. "Rem," he whispered. "Rem Voss?" The leader of the reclamation group smiled without warmth. "Hello, brother. It's been a long time." Marek stared in disbelief. Rem Voss, his estranged brother, whom he hadn't seen in 15 years. The last Marek had heard, Rem was working as a labor organizer in the outer colonies. "You're behind the reclamation?" Marek finally managed to ask. "I lead it," Rem corrected. "Though it existed before I arrived on Horizon 7. The workers here have suffered under corporate exploitation for years. I merely helped them organize their resistance. By sabotaging the station, endangering thousands of lives?" Rem's expression hardened. "The corporation has been endangering those lives for profit all along. Dr. Cho isn't the only one who noticed the pattern of illness. We have our own medical data, our own evidence. Workers have been dying slowly while the corporation extracts valuable compounds from the comet's outgassing compounds they don't want to spend the money to extract safely." "So your solution is to risk killing everyone?" Marek demanded, anger rising. "Our solution was to force an evacuation," Rem countered. "The sabotage was calculated to trigger the emergency protocols, forcing the corporation to evacuate the station and bring the workers to safety. But instead, they took only the executives and essential personnel, proving once again that they see the rest of us as expendable." Marek took a deep breath, trying to process this revelation. "Rem, whatever the corporation's crimes, we're now in a situation where everyone left on this station could die. Sabotaging the reactor goes beyond forcing an evacuation. It threatens a catastrophic failure that would kill everyone." "That wasn't supposed to happen," Rem admitted, showing the first sign of uncertainty. "The reactor damage was more severe than our engineers predicted. We underestimated the cascade effect." "Then help us fix it," Marek urged. "Whatever your grievances against the corporation, surely you don't want the deaths of 10,000 workers on your conscience." Rem studied him, his expression unreadable. "And what happens after we save the station? Return to business as usual? Allow the corporation to continue poisoning workers?" "No," Marek said firmly. "Dr. Cho has compiled evidence of the toxic exposure. Once we establish communications with Ganymede, we can transmit that evidence to regulatory authorities, force an investigation. But none of that happens if we all die here." For a long moment, Rem was silent, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "I'll bring our proposal to the Reclamation Council, but I make no promises. Some believe that martyrdom in the cause of justice is preferable to continued exploitation." "There's no justice in needless death," Marek replied. "Tell your council that we have a plan to save the station and hold the corporation accountable. All we need is cooperation." As Rem turned to leave, Marek called after him. "Why did you ask for me specifically? How did you even know I was here?" Rem paused. "I've always known where you were, brother, after Europa. I followed your career change with interest. As for why you, who better to negotiate with than family? Besides, the station personnel seem to have rallied around you. The chef who stepped up when the engineers fled. It's a powerful symbol." With that, he disappeared back into the shadows of the Arboretum, leaving Marek with more questions than answers. When Marek returned to their makeshift headquarters, he found the situation had deteriorated further. The reactor's condition was worsening more rapidly than predicted, and toxic levels in several sections had risen to immediately dangerous concentrations. "We can't wait for the reclamation's answer," Aliyah told him after he'd briefed the group on his meeting with Rem. The reactor bypass needs to happen now, or we lose everything. But we can't access the main engineering section without passing through areas they control. Merrick reminded her. There might be another way, a maintenance worker suggested hesitantly. The radiation disposal chamber adjacent to the reactor housing. It's heavily shielded, designed to handle radioactive waste. We could access the reactor controls from there. Alia looked skeptical. That chamber isn't designed for human access during operation. The radiation levels would be dangerous even with protection, but not immediately lethal with proper shielding, the worker insisted. And it bypasses the areas controlled by the reclamation entirely. Merrick exchanged glances with Alia. It was a desperate option, but they were running out of alternatives. How many people would need to enter the chamber? He asked. Just 2, Alia replied after a moment's thought. 1 to access the control systems, 1 to monitor radiation levels and operate the chamber's safety protocols. I'll go, Merrick volunteered immediately. I have the engineering background for the control systems. And I'll go with you, Alia said firmly. I know the reactor systems better than anyone else here. Dr. Cho stepped forward. The radiation exposure would be significant. Even with protection, you'd be looking at potential long-term health effects. Better than the certainty of immediate death if the reactor fails, Merrick pointed out grimly. As they began preparations for the dangerous mission, Merrick's communicator buzzed. It was a message from Rem. The Council has reached a decision. Meet me at the Arboretum again in 1 hour. Merrick showed the message to Alia. We don't have an hour to wait for their answer. The reactor bypass needs to happen now. Then we proceed as planned. She agreed. But someone should meet with Rem. Keep the dialogue open. We still need access to the food stores they control, and their cooperation would make everything easier. After some discussion, Dr. Cho volunteered to meet with Rem in Marek's place. As the station's chief medical officer, she had a certain neutrality that might help in negotiations, and she could present her evidence of toxic exposure directly. With that decided, Marek and Alia prepared for their dangerous mission to the radiation disposal chamber. The maintenance worker helped them outfit themselves with the best radiation protection available, not the specialized suits that would have been ideal, but a combination of maintenance radiation gear and improvised shielding made from materials in the kitchen. The lead lining from the specialized refrigeration units should help, Marek explained as he fashioned additional protection. And these insulation panels can be adapted to shield against certain types of radiation. You remember more from your engineering days than you let on, Alia observed. Marek offered a grim smile. Some knowledge you never forget, no matter how much you might want to. Before they left, Linu approached Marek, all 4 hands clutching something wrapped in kitchen towels. For luck, the Proximan said, unfolding the towels to reveal a perfectly formed loaf of bread. I used the last of the real flour. No matter what happens out there, you brought us hope when we had none. Remember that. Touched by the gesture, Marek carefully broke the bread in half, sharing it with Alia. The simple act of breaking bread together, a custom as old as civilization itself, felt like a powerful affirmation of life in the face of possible death. The journey to the radiation disposal chamber was hazardous. They had to traverse sections of the station where environmental controls had failed completely, wearing emergency breathing apparatus and moving carefully through areas where structural integrity was compromised. When they finally reached the access hatch to the chamber, they paused to check their makeshift radiation gear one last time. Once we're inside, we'll have approximately 20 minutes before we reach dangerous exposure levels. Even with the protection, Alia explained. The controls should be accessible from the maintenance panel on the east wall. If we can redirect power through the secondary coolant systems, it should buy us enough time to implement a proper shutdown sequence. Marek nodded, trying to ignore the fear churning in his stomach. Let's do this. The chamber was even more intimidating than he had imagined. Designed to process radioactive waste from the station's reactor, it was a sterile, metallic space filled with ominous-looking machinery. The walls were lined with heavy shielding, and warning indicators glowed red throughout the room. They moved quickly to the maintenance panel, Aaliyah's radiation monitor already clicking ominously. The panel itself was more complicated than standard station equipment, designed for remote operation rather than direct human interaction. I need to bypass the safety interlocks, Aaliyah muttered, her fingers moving deftly despite the bulky protective gloves. Then we can access the reactor control systems. As she worked, Merrick monitored the chamber's environment. The radiation levels were rising faster than they had anticipated, suggesting that the reactor's condition was deteriorating more rapidly than their models had predicted. Aaliyah, we need to hurry. Radiation is increasing exponentially. She nodded without looking up from her work. Almost there. The system is fighting me. It's not designed to allow this kind of access. Finally, the panel displayed a new set of controls, a direct link to the reactor systems. But what they saw made their hearts sink. The damage was far more extensive than their external diagnostics had indicated. The sabotage had compromised multiple redundant safety systems, and the reactor was much closer to critical failure than they had realized. We can't implement a standard shutdown, Aaliyah said, her voice tight with stress. There's not enough time, and too many systems are compromised. Merrick stared at the displays, his mind racing. Then an idea struck him, one born not from his engineering knowledge, but from his years in the kitchen. A pressure release, he said suddenly. Like a pressure cooker about to explode. No, we can't shut it down properly, but we can vent the excess energy in a controlled way. Aaliyah looked at him, understanding dawning. The emergency release valves. If we could redirect the buildup through the secondary cooling systems. Exactly. It won't fix the reactor, but it might prevent a catastrophic failure long enough for us to evacuate or receive help. They worked frantically, Merrick applying principles of pressure and heat management that he'd used countless times in cooking to the infinitely more dangerous context of a failing nuclear reactor. The radiation monitor's clicking had accelerated to an almost continuous buzz, warning them that their time was running out. "Oh, there," Aaliyah said finally. "The reconfiguration is complete, or now we just need to initiate the sequence." But as she reached for the final control, the chamber suddenly plunged into darkness. The emergency lights flickered on a moment later, casting everything in an eerie red glow. "Power fluctuation," Aaliyah explained tensely. "The reactor instability is affecting all systems." The control panel had reset, losing their carefully programmed sequence. They would have to start over, and the radiation levels were already approaching the maximum safe exposure time. "Ugo," Merrick told Aaliyah, "I can finish this. There's no reason for both of us to take the full exposure." "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped. "I know these systems better than you do. And I know pressure management. Trust me, Aaliyah, this is what I do now." Their eyes met through their protective visors. After a moment, she nodded reluctantly. 2 minutes. If you're not out by then, I'm coming back in." As Aaliyah left the chamber, Merrick turned back to the controls, his hands moving with the same precise confidence with which he prepared his most complex dishes. The principles were the same: balance, timing, the careful management of energy. The radiation monitor continued its ominous buzz as he worked, reprogramming the sequence. His vision began to blur slightly, an early symptom of radiation exposure, but he pushed through, focusing on the task. Just as he completed the final command sequence, the chamber door burst open. Merrick turned, expecting to see Aaliyah returning as promised, but instead found himself facing Rem and 2 armed reclamation members. "Step away from the controls," Rem ordered, weapon raised. Rem, there's no time for this. Merrick pleaded. The reactor is about to fail catastrophically. I've programmed an emergency pressure release, but it needs to be initiated now. Rem hesitated, looking at the control panel with its flashing warning indicators. It's the truth, Merrick insisted. Check the readings yourself if you don't believe me, but do it quickly or we all die. After a moment of tension, Rem lowered his weapon and moved to verify the reactor status. His face paled as he saw the readings. Do it, he said to Merrick. Initiate the sequence. Merrick pressed the final command, and throughout the station, a series of controlled explosions could be felt as emergency valves opened, releasing the dangerous buildup of pressure and energy from the reactor core into shielded containment areas. Alarms blared throughout the chamber as the radiation levels spiked temporarily, then began to stabilize. The immediate danger had passed, though the reactor remained critically damaged. We need to get out of here now. Merrick told Rem, feeling the effects of radiation exposure growing stronger. The radiation levels in this chamber are lethal with prolonged exposure. As they evacuated the chamber, they found Aaliyah waiting outside with a security team, weapons drawn. For a tense moment, it seemed a confrontation between the two groups was inevitable. But Merrick stepped between them. The reactor is stabilized temporarily, he announced. But we're not out of danger yet. We need to work together now, all of us, if anyone is going to survive. Rem looked at the assembled personnel, then back at his own people. Finally, he lowered his weapon completely. The Reclamation Council has voted to cooperate, he said. Dr. Cho's evidence was compelling. We still believe the corporation must be held accountable, but not at the cost of everyone's lives. The tension in the corridor eased slightly, though the security team remained alert. We'll share control of the food stores, Rem continued, and our technical personnel will assist with repairs. In return, we want your commitment that when rescue comes, the evidence of corporate negligence will be presented to the authorities. You have my word, Merrick promised. No one is being left behind and no crime is being covered up. As they made their way back to the command center, Merrick began to feel the full effects of his radiation exposure. His vision swam, and his steps became unsteady. Aaliyah moved to support him, concern evident in her face. Medical needs to look at you immediately, she insisted. You were in there too long. By the time they reached the command center, Merrick could barely stand. Dr. Cho rushed to examine him, her expression growing grave as she assessed his condition. Significant radiation exposure, she told Aaliyah quietly. We can treat the immediate symptoms, but without proper medical facilities, just do what you can, Merrick interrupted weakly. We need to focus on the next steps. The reactor won't hold indefinitely. Despite Dr. Cho's objections, Merrick insisted on participating in the planning session that followed, though he did so from a makeshift bed in the corner of the command center. The combined teams of his original group and the reclamation members worked together to develop a comprehensive survival strategy. With the reactor temporarily stabilized and the cooperation of all station personnel secured, attention turned to establishing communication with potential rescuers. The observatory's auxiliary array was their best hope, but reconfiguring it would require specialized knowledge and parts from multiple sections of the station. As the teams organized the communications effort, Merrick's condition worsened. Dr. Cho administered what treatment she could with limited supplies, but it was clear that he needed advanced medical care unavailable on the damaged station. Aaliyah rarely left his side, coordinating repair efforts from a terminal near his bed. During a quiet moment between crises, she took his hand. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Why take the full radiation exposure yourself?" Merrick managed a weak smile. "I told you, the pressure management, it's what I do now. This isn't a joke. Marek, you may have saved us all, but at what cost to yourself? He looked at her seriously. After Europa, I couldn't bear the responsibility of lives in my hands. I ran away to the kitchen, where the worst consequence of failure was an unsatisfied diner. But this crisis, it showed me that running away doesn't change who you are. I'm still an engineer. I'm still someone who can make a difference. You're much more than that, Aaliyah told him. You've become a leader these people trust, a symbol of hope when everything seemed lost. Before Marek could respond, a commotion erupted across the command center. The communications team was shouting excitedly. We've done it, a technician announced. Signal established with Ganymede Colony. They've received our distress call and are dispatching rescue ships immediately. A cheer went up throughout the command center. After days of fighting for survival against overwhelming odds, help was finally coming. As the celebration continued around him, Marek felt a strange peace settling over him. Whether he survived to see the rescue or not, he had found something he thought he'd lost forever after the Europa disaster: purpose, and the courage to accept responsibility despite the risks. Rem approached his bedside, looking uncomfortable but determined. The evidence of corporate negligence has been transmitted to Ganymede along with our distress signal. Regulatory authorities are already involved. The corporation won't be able to cover this up. Good, Marek replied. Justice matters, but so does forgiveness. Rem, remember that? His brother nodded slowly. Rest now. You've done enough. Over the next 48 hours, as they waited for rescue ships to arrive, the station's personnel continued their efforts to maintain the fragile stability they'd achieved. The reactor held, thanks to Marek's improvised solution. The protein synthesizers continued to provide basic nutrition. The air filtration workarounds kept toxic levels manageable. And throughout it all, Marek's condition fluctuated, sometimes improving enough to allow him to offer guidance. Other times worsening to the point where Dr. Cho feared they would lose him before help arrived. When the rescue ships finally docked with Horizon 7, they brought medical personnel, emergency supplies, and technical experts who could properly address the reactor situation. The evacuation began immediately, with the most critically injured, including Marek, given priority. As Marek was prepared for transport to the medical ship, the station personnel gathered to see him off. Not just his kitchen staff and the technicians he'd worked with, but hundreds of others who had heard the story of the chef who stepped up when leadership abandoned them. Linu approached with the rest of the kitchen team, presenting Marek with another symbolic loaf of bread. For the journey, the Proximan said, and to remember us by. Alia walked alongside his stretcher to the docking bay. I'll see you on Ganymede, she promised. We have a lot to talk about once you're recovered. Like what? Marek asked weakly. Like whether the best engineer I know might consider returning to the field, or whether a certain station might need both an engineer and a chef in its rebuilding. Marek smiled. I think I've learned that I don't have to be one or the other. Maybe I can be both. As the medical transport undocked from Horizon 7, Marek looked out the viewport at the station he'd helped save. The massive ring structure still rotated against the backdrop of space, damaged but intact, its lights glowing defiantly against the darkness. Beyond it, the strange comet continued its journey, its blue-green tail stretching across the void. In the face of corporate negligence, sabotage, and the unforgiving environment of space itself, the 10,000 souls aboard Horizon 7 had survived through cooperation, ingenuity, and courage, and perhaps most importantly, through the recognition that every person, regardless of their title or role, had something valuable to contribute. As the station receded from view, Marek reflected on the question that had haunted him since the crisis began. If a chef can save a station, then what is a human being? The answer, he now realized, was both simpler and more profound than he had imagined. A human being was someone who could rise to meet whatever challenge faced them, who could find strength in their apparent weaknesses, who could build bridges across the divisions of role and rank and ideology when survival demanded it. And as he drifted into an exhausted sleep, heading toward recovery and whatever future awaited him, Marek Sade, engineer, chef, and reluctant hero, carried with him the most important lesson of all, that sometimes it was in the act of saving others that one finally saved oneself. Dawn broke over Horizon 7 as it continued its orbit around the comet, the first rays of distant sunlight glinting off its damaged but enduring structure. Inside, the station stirred with activity as repair crews worked alongside former reclamation members to rebuild what had been broken. In the kitchens, Linu and the remaining staff prepared meals for the workers, continuing the tradition Marek had established of bringing comfort and hope through food in the darkest of times. And somewhere in the vastness of space between the station and Ganymede, Marek looked back at the fragile human outpost and wondered, if a chef can save a station, then what is a human being? The answer, he decided, was still being written, one brave choice at a time.